Hey there, and welcome to the Mugcast, a cozy listen to pair with your coffee. I'm Hannah, the writer behind hugin.amug and hannahscafe on Medium, where I cover everything from music to psychology as a woman living abroad. Here, I read my stories aloud with a few fresh reflections and some insights along the way. So grab your mug, settle in, and let's get into today's piece. I am so excited to be back behind the mic and sitting in my favorite city of all, Kaohsiung in the south of Taiwan. I finally made it back after a loop through Korea and 5 months of living in Korea, and I'm so excited. I feel so at home here. So immediately I had to come back and jump back into recording. And today I'm going to share something special with you that I feel like hasn't received a lot of attention recently. I've watched the 2026 Grammys and I was kind of surprised that LUX, the album by Rosalía that was dropped last year, I think in October, November, wasn't at all talked about. Despite the fact that I think this is one of the best albums that came out last year and it's amazing in quality. It is full of orchestras, there's an aria in there, there's amazing vocal performances by Rosalía herself. It is it uses 13 different languages and it is just a blast to listen to, a masterpiece artistically and musically. And there's been so much talk about it that I really don't understand why there was no one mentioning it at the Grammys at all. So here I am trying to shed some more light on looks. And I want to do this by specifically emphasizing the topic of feminism in this album, which I guess makes a lot of sense because the album Looks by Rosalia, who's a Spanish artist, by the way, basically talks about a lot of different female spiritual leaders. And the research that Rosalia did in the making of this album was around different nuns and different tales around important females, leading figures who had tales and, well, some sort of spiritual importance across a lot of different cultures. She drew not just from European religions, but also from India, a lot of Asian religions. There's tales from Japan and tales from China. So I think this is really an amazing lesson in female spirituality as a whole and historic female spirituality at that, which I love. But then at the same time, in this article and this podcast, I will also be discussing the Vogue article that came out last year, where people were talking about how for women, it is now a shameful thing to admit you have a boyfriend. So this is also kind of mixed into today's discussion. And along the way, I will be trying to teach you, or trying to, I guess teach is a strong word, trying to put in a few ideas of how I view female psychology. And I'm going to add some keywords of Animus and Anima and how those relate to xenophobia. So I'll be reading to you the article Lux Sheds Light on the Fifth Wave of Feminism, Spirituality, and En Vogue Singledom. I was really afraid of pronouncing that word en vogue because I definitely can't speak French. I don't know why, for that reason, I put it in the title. When women are embarrassed about having a man, they start singing about nuns, music as a reflection of a generation. So again, we're talking about Gen Z and millennials here. There is almost nothing that can make it through my headphones despite the diamond tears of Jesus or God's stalkerdom on Rosalia's new album Lux. And both Diamond Tears of Jesus and God's stalkerdom are actually names of songs on this album. I myself was born Catholic in Austria, defined myself as an atheist for a lot of my life, and now I read the fascinating stories of nuns like it was a book talk favorite. I'm thankful for this album teaching me about female history through music, and if you haven't listened to this yet, especially if you're a woman, please don't waste any more time. This is a gift to your ears and thank me later. It fills me with such pride and a sneaky little side eye because I sort of predicted last year that this would happen, that female music made it these days into the sound that shapes our generation and time. It can be the low vibrations of Olivia Dean, who just became the Artist of the Year, whispering softly into your ears, the eardrum crashing vocal magic of Ray, who will soon be dropping her new album that we're all anticipating on the 29th of March 2026, or the unidentifiable jazz-defying artistry of Leve, who just received a Grammy as well for the best classical album, I believe. I don't know the precise title, but it was I think classic vocal album was the title of the award she received in the Grammys Awards 2026. All of these are sending shivers down your spine. Yeah, I mean your spine. Definitely not any part of your body that's located elsewhere. And if you want to sit down with emotional lyrics, I would recommend to pick from Selena Gomez, who had an amazing album with Benny Blanco last year, or Taylor Swift. I mean, we all know Wood, right? What a time to be a woman in music. It doesn't surprise me that women these days find it hard to love men. I'm way into these songs, and I don't have space left in my cochlea for any other "do you want to touch my biceps" pickup lines. And the new Lux album is the diamond on the cheek, the pearl in the necklace, and the best piece of porcelain you only bring out for when the girls come over for tea. For men, bring the stoneware, just to show him what stability and reliability look like. I'm sorry, not sorry for the black humor here. So, in the following, I will introduce you to The Magic of Looks, the album by Rosalía, and what Rosalía expects of you as a listener, the positioning of looks in the female psyche and the fifth wave feminism, why the recent Vogue article is another artifact of our times, and the challenge that feminism faces in the fifth wave at this very moment. And if you want to read along to me continuing throughout this article, you can click the link below. I have linked the original Medium article so you can comfortably scan along with your eyes if you would like to, and also if there's any pictures that I'm mentioning, you can check those pictures out in the original article via the link below. So what is Lux? The album Lux, which I am probably not pronouncing correctly, but it is a Roman word, so a Latin word. So I don't think I have to be too technical about it because it is a dead language. The album Lux was released by the Spanish artist Rosalía, who is no stranger to award shows and fame. Her previous album Motomami already created waves in the music industry. It's one of those words, by the way, where you have to count how many M's there are. Motomami. There might have been 3. I might have made a mistake, okay? I'm sorry. This is a point at which other artists try to push out new songs as fast as possible so they can keep the money rolling. So when they get some awards, they would usually try to make as much money and as much new music as they possibly can. But Rosalía didn't. She started a 2 to 3 year process of introspection, deep learning, and spiritually inspired musical craftsmanship across the borders of languages and cultures. She became an expert in the gripping stories of female spiritual leaders in different cultures and religions and used their native languages to write songs that relate to her personal life, are inspired by female history, and yet ring true in so many modern women's ears. It surely wasn't an easy job, to be honest. She sings in 13 languages, so there is a 99% chance you won't understand all of the words in this album. Shoving aside the fact that this is not just a cultural statement in an English centric world, which is low key my side eye at the Grammys, because I mean, how did Apate and Golden not have presence at the Grammys? I'm sorry. I absolutely love Wildflower, but this was like the fact that they won in 2026 when the album and the song were released in May 2024. I understand that they re-released the song a year later, but I mean, I really love Billie, and I'll be writing an article about her very soon because I really admire her artistry and her history and her advocacy. But she should have won last year, not this year. And it shouldn't have been the song of the year, it should have been the album of the year last year. And I really feel that there should have been a non English song that would win the song of the year this year, along with Bad Bunny's album of the year. I think this would have made sense, specifically given the, well, peculiar circumstances that are currently taking place in the US. Um, I mean, I think Billy turned it around really well by making a statement against ICE. But um, if you're into the Grammys, please check out my new Billie Eilish article because I am so deep into her story at the moment and her advocacy and what it says about her that she spoke up, but seems to always receive the awards that she receives at a time where people can't give her credit for it. It's kind of interesting. Anyways, so shoving aside the fact that this is not just a cultural statement in an English centric world, the singing in 13 different languages in one album for Rosalía, it is also a strain on the listeners because you have to actually tediously translate and read along to make sense of what she's actually singing. Simming? What the fuck? Sometimes my mouth just malfunctions. On this topic, Rosalia just stated in an interview that she, quote unquote, likes being slapped in the face by an artist. Interesting statement. And she wants her fans to engage with her music deeply, while she expects that since making this album was quite an ordeal for her, it shall also be appreciated in similar depth. She asks her listeners to put in time for the listening. The songs are not background tunes. They are genuine avant garde music. And I am not the only one who thinks so. And hell, it deserves some genuine, eye bobbing, jaw dropping appreciation because these songs are insanely good. As much as I would love to do a song by song review of this album, I know myself too well to do so because I would go completely overboard, as I've done that before with Taylor Swift albums and Sabrina Carpenter albums, and these articles always turn out way too long and way too deep. So I will just mention that the album was recorded with an entire orchestra. There are flamenco elements in it, which is Rosalia's specialty. There's Jamaican beats, there's classic jazz bass lines that melt into spikier Latino rhythms. This is one of my favorite songs that does that. And all of that with a sudden choir moment in German and a freaking aria. If these saints, the female saints that Rosalia sings about, weren't smiling down from the heavens when Lux was dropped on the 7th of November 2025, then they were raving above the clouds, as they should. If you know the album, then you probably were aware of most of the facts above. But because I know that looking for this myself, sorry, but because I know I was looking for this myself, here's a little lecture from Rosalia to us on all the important women in history to know about to understand the album better. Basically, this is a list of the female saints and which song they are referenced in. So, this is basically like a personal textbook for the modern fifth wave feminist to learn about all of the important women that came before us. In the first song on the album, Reliquia, it is inspired by Saint Rose of Lima. The second song, the German song Berghain, was inspired by Hildegard von Bingen, who is a very famous German nun, and Vimala. Foku Rani, and here I will briefly apologize because again, these are 13 languages and I don't speak them. And thus I will mispronounce a lot of the names. I'm very sorry. So, Fokurani was inspired by Saint Rosalia of Palermo. But this song is actually only available on the digital version, not on the digital versions of the Lux album. There's Savignon Blanc, which was inspired by Saint Teresa of Avila. or Teresa of Jesus. There's Jean, which was inspired by Jean d'Arc, which makes sense. It's also not in the digital version of the album. There's Novia Robot, which was inspired by Sunboer and Miriam, which is also not on the digital version, unfortunately. There's La Yugular, which was inspired by Rabia al Adawiya. There's Magnolias, which was inspired by Anandamaima. I'm so sorry for mispronouncing these names, but these are languages that I'm frankly unfamiliar with. Porcelana was inspired by Ryonen Gensho, which is a Japanese reference. Mio Cristo Piange Diamanti was inspired by Claire of Assisi, and De Madruga was inspired by Saint Olga of Kiev. And if you've now heard all these names and you thought to yourself, well, how the hell am I supposed to take it down if you can't even pronounce that shit? First of all, sorry again. And second of all, I have linked all of these saints with their Wikipedia pages and stories in my article. So if you just click open the link below, you will find the entire list for your personal reference. And you can just easily go in there and read all of the stories, and you don't need to rely on my crappy pronunciation. You're welcome. Also, I have inside the Medium article a link to the entire album lyrics translated into English line by line so you can fully understand every single word. Because I've spent weeks glued to the screen, Google translating and piecing it all together, so this page is truly a treasure. If you are interested, click open that link because it's not worth trying to translate every single sentence. Also, can somebody please turn this album into a Duolingo for feminists? Thank you very much. This is like the best language lesson ever. Now let's move on to what does LUX have to do with fifth wave feminism? After having the shortest possible fangirl moment over this album, which was still a bit long, but I'm sorry, not sorry, I will answer the question of what this has to do with fifth wave feminism. For some context to begin with, I'm right now living and studying at a university in South Korea and just finished that process actually. Now I'm back in Taiwan, and I'm attending a cross cultural class on feminism and female history. If you know anything about Korea, then you will be aware that feminism is a very, very touchy topic in this country. In said class, I recently had the pleasure of conducting a little research project about the female psyche and how it was reflected in the three waves of immigrant women in the early days of Hollywood. So we're talking 1920s, the ending of the silent film era, towards the 1950s. So anything around the Second World War, basically. During this project, I talked about the concept of animus and anima and its implications for the female psyche and the image of the female psyche throughout history. And at this point, if you're again in the Medium article that I link below, you will see my actual slide that I was presenting, which shows you three female characters from back in the days, the golden era of Hollywood. All of them are immigrants to the US who were very famous actresses. And basically, I've drafted them on a line between animus and anima, and I've contrasted this with a line that shows the increase of xenophobia, which I'll be talking about in a second. But for anyone who doesn't know the concepts of animus and anima, basically that are two terms that were brought up by Carl Jung, who is a very famous psychoanalyst, along with Sigmund Freud, who was basically called the father of psychoanalysis. And Jung is one of the, I would also say, most influential figures in this domain of psychology. And he has a very, I wouldn't say complicated model of the psyche, but he also sort of further explained the idea of the subconscious that Freud already had. And one part of the subconscious that he mentions is the animus and anima, basically the female and male subconscious parts. These are often discussed in pop psychology, I find. I hear these terms a lot online, but I will say, as a little remark, academically, they're not that favored. A, because this is a very old concept, and B, because it is quite existentialist. It is putting male and female on a line instead of in, well, in all shades. It's kind of giving the entire concept of being male or female a duality, which is not really what it should be. I mean, of course, for the early 20th century, that would have been adequate and actually quite revolutionary. But for the beginning of the 21st century, we should know that gender is a societal concept and not, though it does definitely influence the subconscious, I don't think we should take Jungian psychology and 100% transfer it into our times, because there's a lot that we've added and a lot of information and a lot of learning in psychology that's happened since these two terms have been brought up, which is also why I find it a little bit funny that people right now in pop psychology are picking them up so much. It's like shadow work and animus and anima and femininity are becoming the new top terms. It's good to know these terms, obviously, for your personal reflection, but I do want to advise caution in using them as ultimatums or like as final statements. Um, Gender is not a duality anymore. Thank the Lord. Okay, so please have a look at that slide if you want to get a little more detail. So during the actual talk where well, the speech I held about this slide and about 15 others, I spent around 15 minutes diving only into this one slide, and another 30 minutes building up the background, which makes this sort of hard to summarize here in writing and on the podcast. But if you're interested, leave me a comment and I can record the whole in depth presentation that was about the Golden Age Hollywood and how immigrating women transformed Hollywood and how Hollywood transformed them, and a lot of the time impacted them more negatively than positively. But be warned, this is not a very fast endeavor, so you would have to sit through a long podcast episode. So, during this presentation that I was talking about, my somewhat Shrek inspired quote to explain the female psyche in relation to historic events and the development of feminism in waves was that women are like onions, but with a history. This means that women have many layers, just like men, between the subconscious, the self, the id, the personal masks, the personas, internal conflicts, and last but not least, the public image of the woman. And if some of these terms didn't ring a bell for you, this is all Jungian psychology, and there's another point at which I can dive into those. However, as if there were not enough conflicts, the female image is somewhat the most fragile and most malleable throughout history. Here is a simplified example of the above presentation. If you're looking at the slide, you will see a black and white image of a woman called Marlene Dietrich, who came to the US in the early 1930s as an artist and actress and was an androgynous, exotic, and openly queer person, which crazy at the time, who was loved for being precisely that image. Only 6 years later, Hedy Lamarr came to Hollywood, and she was also characterized as the exotic beauty, but the public was not very interested in her intellectual abilities or her specialness or her, God forbid, her queerness, which she wasn't able to even tap into that territory. Her opinions basically didn't matter anymore. She was just a beautiful, exotic woman. World War II was pressing on her ability to express herself within the constraints of the contemporary female. Audrey Hepburn, who you will also see on the slide, who came after World War II ended when Hollywood fell into a wave of xenophobia due to fear of communism among the actors, became the doe-eyed image of submissive women at the beginning of her career. And only over the years did she gain recognition as anything besides that, a doe-eyed cute girl. The idea is the more xenophobic a society is, the more it likes its women to remain in the anima, to stay feminine, and to be face value pretty. So the more xenophobic a culture gets, the more likely it wants its women to act stereotypically female. Despite out of group bias influencing our image of women amongst women, time naturally has a tendency to dance along the line between animus and anima in the fashion of a pendulum. And this is the main takeaway from this article if you want to learn about female psychology, if this is what you're here for, if one generation of women leans more towards the animus, so behaves more male, the next one will walk more towards the anima side. So the next generation will try to act more female, stereotypically female. Remember, I'm not talking about the psyche of the individual woman here. What I'm talking about here is basically the standard woman, the woman in society, the ideal woman. The individual woman is the deeper layers of the onion that people don't get to see. I'm talking about the shell and the public image of what a woman should be. And this public image tends to, throughout time, kind of walk back and forth between animus and anima, animus and anima. So, if that's what happened in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, we walked from animus all the way to anima. As the Second World War was unfolding and xenophobia grew, worldwide and in the US especially, what about right now? Where are we right now on the pendulum between animus and anima, and thus a societal expectation of women? And my hypothesis for this is that the pendulum between being feminine and masculine psychologically and the feminine masculine duality of what a woman should be is swinging faster and faster. In 2013, we had Miley Cyrus in a short haircut, boots, and well, nothing else, swinging on a wrecking ball. And in 2015, we saw Adele screaming hello into mic for her lover dressed in long robes, and only 4 years later, in 2019, Billie Eilish popularized the song Bad Guy on the radio in a very baggy outfit. So the thing I'm trying to hint here is, in just a few years, there were large changes into what the general public wanted to see in a woman. And this is not just my personal opinion or the personal branding of each of these artists, but there is an underlying question of whether the public at the time is receptive of this type of image. So, you know how they say you always have to be at the right place at the right time? Adele rang a bell with the general public and the way that she looked at a certain time because the public was receptive to this sort of image of a woman. Now in 2024, we have Sabrina Carpenter, who suddenly blew up, quote unquote, suddenly, with her feminine storytelling in lingerie. And I'm smiling at the term suddenly here, because while everyone analyzed her and was focusing on how well she had branded herself, I couldn't help but see the fact that she just hit the spirit of the time. We were approaching the peak of anima again in 2024, where femininity was a YouTube buzzword. If you've been on YouTube on 2024, you would have seen so many new femininity coaches here. So this was not a coincidence. All of these YouTubers on femininity drew a large my goodness, viewership, as if that word had been so hard. As much as spirituality in the shape of tarot cards and crystals also became very famous in that time. In 2025, what was activating your dark feminine to attract and not chase lasted a whole year. And it had become a whole debate to, well, not have the bare minimum man. And we had a whole struggle around green and red flags. And we buried we were buried in a celebration of queer couples, especially, and maybe this is just an artifact of my feed, for lesbian couples. So I think there was just a really big celebration of femininity at the time. I suppose we're slowly making our way back into the animus at the moment, but we still lean greatly towards the anime expression. So I want to emphasize that these trends are my observations, and I'm not judging anybody's individual orientations, but rather I strive to embrace the multifaceted nature of music itself. And I am just trying to reflect what I see in the general media, which is that femininity is being celebrated more. And yes, people are questioning Sabrina Carpenter, but most people still celebrate her. And femininity is definitely something that was on the rise for the last years. And I do think that also had to do with the rise in xenophobia. And Lux, the album that I was talking about at the beginning, is proof of this move. It portrays high femininity and spirituality with a nod towards not needing a man at all and relying on sacred, empowered women rooted in factual historical backgrounds. Those who cursed at me last year for liking Sabrina Carpenter, as she's too male centric, to ever be a real feminist, should feel appeased by this. Does that sound familiar? If you are anything like me, then you also are reminded in this moment of the recent Vogue article that engaged brains across the globe. So now we're getting to why the Vogue article was only the next brick in the wall. Music is one domain that represents shifts in the public image of the ideal woman. My personal favorite, arguably, but there are certainly other types of public representations that we can use to look at this shift between animus and anima. Social media is modern society's most unhinged mirror of sudden desires and cultural movements, and sometimes it is painfully so. I have to say, as someone living in the midst of the Korea boo bubble, I'm struggling a little bit. Which reminds me to point out one important factor in the fifth wave of feminism and the ever changing female psyche: globalization. When I read the Vogue article titled, "Is Having a Boyfriend Embarrassing Now?" I agreed and related to it deeply. It represented my sentiments, as I have frequently found myself sitting over coffee with my actively dating girlfriends discussing our weird partner choices. And one very unfiltered German girl straight out asked me, "Don't you think it's embarrassing to introduce this guy to us? You should do better than that." And while she wasn't really gentle with me, she wasn't wrong either. Yet the culture in Korea is so stuffed with love, the streets filled with couples who can't seem to be able to walk a step without holding on to each other, and social media perpetuates this image so effectively that while my head is so often in the West, my body walks down Seoul streets, and thus my body and soul are inherently split. In that way, I think the Vogue article, has pointed at our slow movement towards the animus side again, where we kind of reject the male to be more male ourselves as women, while highlighting the challenge of fifth wave feminism, which is the integration of different ideas of feminine and feminist across cultures. It is historically true that all waves of feminism have certain challenges, such as including women in the political decision making, first wave of feminism, making the voices of women across different races heard, second wave of feminism, third wave of feminism, and also adding the voices of queer communities into the discussion. This would be the fourth wave of feminism. And as a young feminist, I now see the greatest challenge in ensuring that as women, we stay true to the roots while allowing for all expressions. Because the pitfall of womanhood, in my opinion, is judgment. We are the gender with more impactful decision making, more generational impact, more fights we have to put up to make our voices heard, while preaching that there is a difference between gender and biological sex. Right now, I see something very sad happening, which is women arguing against women, feminists shaming other feminists for not being feminist enough, or supposed mentors turning a movement into a doctrine. I'll be honest here, the most hurtful comments I've ever received were all written by women, under articles where I hoped to spread love and appreciation for another woman. I was called a racist, a shame on feminism, or dumb, or plainly just a woman with no taste, simply for advocating for another woman. I'm not gonna lie, I'm mad at that because while I know that hate on the internet is a natural thing, women as the main attackers leaves a question about feminism for me as a feminist. One of my role models also recently said she would like to erase her feminist tattoo not because it's ugly, but because she doesn't agree with how women has been radicalized in her eyes and how feminists are starting to label each other as good and bad feminists. As we move back into our animus and integrate the male into our female psychology, let's not become men after all, okay? Let's not become extremists and offenders and the reason for many thousands of dollars in another therapist's account, okay? Can we all be nice to each other? Please, please, please? You get the reference if you get it. Let one girl lay out her tarot cards, another pray to Hildegard von Bingen, and the third be an atheist. Your business is not anyone else's problem, and while it is a common feminine behavior to share which is great, can we also learn to share and not hurt? Cross cultural feminism is truly my ideal. Additionally, many women, many images of the woman, and many cultures exist that have different expressions of feminism. Let me tell you that I've learned how dumb I was about Asian feminism before I started attending a course in Korea on Korean feminism. Maybe now that I get a hateful, hurtful comment, sorry, maybe now when I get a hateful and hurtful comment telling me that I'm not feminist enough by another Western minded white woman, and yes, honestly, I think my demographic is actually the most problematic one here, I can brush it off more easily because I know that if I don't know enough, the other person on the other end, I'm almost perfectly sure, also doesn't know enough. Because otherwise, if they knew enough, they would realize that there are different opinions that exist, and thus we wouldn't need to fight each other at all. I am not saying I'm cleverer than the others. I'm merely suggesting that my learnings have made me more humble and more open to dialogue. I'm almost perfectly sure that hate commenting girls on the other side of the internet don't even have an idea of all the feminism that they have rendered useless by getting at me. I've learned so much about human dignity, how painful it is to find your own attack, and how all humans, not just women, can thrive under subtle pressure, but not when the core, their dignity, is under attack. So, in a nutshell, Lux is a timely and musically expertly executed artifact of the ever changing female psyche and the struggle of an old and precious movement going through the tests of time. That the fifth wave was going to be about integrating femininity was nothing new. I wrote about it before, but what Rosalia's album adds is another step towards showcasing the abilities of both female artists and the high expectations they can have on their female audience. An audience of educated women who speak several languages, take time to learn, and are well versed about the mental and spiritual heritage of womanhood, all the while being kind mentors who invite newcomers rather than judge them. It clearly spans cultures in a time where feminism is under a threat of fragmentation by its very own members, not for the first time, but the pressure is growing from women on other women. Thus, I view Rosalia's music as a beautiful testament to how women across cultures and languages can be united through music and in trying to genuinely understand each other. As always, if change happens, I suppose women have to be first. So let's all be the change that we wish upon our daughters. A life where you choose what you wear, what you think, what you believe in, and where you're capable of uplifting one another rather than talking each other down. That is the wrap for this article. I think it was a very, very dense piece, and so this recording actually got much longer than I anticipated it to be. But I hope you took something away from it. I hope we can all be nice to each other, literally, um, amongst women, amongst other genders, in general. I think there's enough hatred going around the world to last a lifetime. We don't need to add to it on an individual level and on a social media level and on a general cultural and political level. I think we've had enough of it. Especially as young people, I think we've learned a lot in our lifetimes, our short lifetimes, about hate through different platforms, and we don't need to add to it, right? I hope that you are inspired to read up on the spiritual leaders that Rosalía sings about in her album Lux. I hope you're inspired to listen to the album itself. I highly, highly recommend it. I also hope you have a lot of fun digging into cultural feminism if that's your topic, and maybe you've learned a thing or two about Animus and Anima and Jungian psychology. I'm so happy to have had you here listening to this podcast. So thank you for granting me access to your ears here on the Muckcast. You can read more of my writing on Medium under hannahscafe or hugin.amug, or you can follow me on the Instagram handle hugin.amug for cozy content and updates. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow the podcast and share it with a fellow coffee lover. And let me know in the comments which article I should read next. I hope you had a nice cappuccino with this episode, and I'm sending you a warm hug from my mug to yours. Hope to see you soon somewhere on Hannah's Cafe. Bye bye!